The year was 1911, and the Ozark forest breathed with a mist that clung to the earth like a memory refusing to fade. The narrow dirt path wound between towering pines, slick with morning dew. Birds called out from unseen branches, their voices echoing through the dense fog. Eleanor Gray, a 26-year-old schoolteacher from St. Louis, guided her mule along the uneven trail. Her boots were caked with mud, her brown cloak damp, and her heart both nervous and hopeful. She was on her way to Whisper Hollow, a small settlement deep in the hills where she had accepted a teaching position. The locals at the railway stop had warned her not to take the forest route. "There's something strange near Maple Creek," one old woman had whispered, clutching her rosary. "A cabin that don't stay gone. They say it smiles through its windows when the lost ones walk by." Eleanor had only smiled politely. She was a woman of learning, of books, and reason. Ghost stories, she thought, were for those who didn't understand loneliness. Yet, as the mist thickened and the forest grew darker, she couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was following her. Not with menace, but with quiet curiosity. By sunset, the forest seemed endless. Her mule was weary, and her lantern's flame fluttered weakly in the cool wind. Just when she began to worry about finding shelter, a faint light flickered through the trees. There, nestled between two great oaks, stood a small cabin, tilted slightly to one side. Its wooden walls were weathered silver gray, its windows glowing with soft amber light. But what struck Eleanor most was how the light moved, as though the windows themselves were curving upward, smiling. She hesitated. The warnings echoed in her mind. But exhaustion won. "Just one night," she whispered. "A roof is better than rain." As she tied her mule and approached the porch, the boards creaked underfoot. The wind died suddenly, and for a heartbeat, she thought she heard laughter, gentle and warm, like that of a family sharing supper. When she pushed open the door, it didn't resist. The cabin seemed to be waiting for her. Inside, a soft fire burned in the hearth, though no one seemed to have tended it. Dust hung in the air, catching the glow like tiny stars. A rocking chair swayed slightly near the fire, and a folded quilt rested on it as if placed there moments ago. "Hello?" Eleanor called out, her voice trembling between curiosity and fear. No answer, only the low hum of the crackling fire. She set her lantern down and noticed something odd. In the reflection of the window pane, the glow of the fire looked almost like a face. Two bright spots where eyes might be, and the curved line of the fire's edge forming a smile. Eleanor chuckled nervously. "Just tired, Ellie," she muttered. "Too many ghost tales in one day." Still, before lying down, she whispered softly, "Thank you, whoever you are." Outside, unseen, the light in the windows shimmered, as if in response. Rain came before midnight. Sheets of it hammered against the roof, the wind howling through the trees like a wild choir. Eleanor couldn't sleep. The walls creaked softly, but instead of fear she felt comforted. As thunder rolled, she thought she heard humming. A lullaby, faint but familiar. Her mother used to sing the same tune when she was small. She closed her eyes and saw flashes of a memory that wasn't hers. A bearded man carving wood by the fire, a woman baking bread, a child laughing near the rocking chair. When she awoke, the fire had burned low, but on the table sat a loaf of fresh bread, still warm, and beside it, a single white daisy in a tin cup. Eleanor froze. She had been alone all night. The cabin, she thought, had taken care of her. Morning sunlight spilled through the cabin windows, soft and golden. On the wooden table lay a folded piece of parchment, written in elegant cursive, for the traveler who listens when others only walk by. Stay as long as you need. The cabin smiles on kind hearts. Her fingers trembled as she read it. There was no name, no footprints outside, no sign of life beyond the singing birds. She smiled faintly. "Then I'll be kind enough to deserve your smile," she said aloud, her voice breaking the silence. Before leaving, she placed one of her apples beside the loaf, a small gesture of gratitude. And as she walked away, she thought she saw, reflected in the window, the faint outline of three smiling faces watching her go. By the time Eleanor reached Whisper Hollow, the story of the cabin itched at her mind like a forgotten melody. The townsfolk welcomed her kindly, but when she mentioned where she had stayed, the color drained from their faces. Old Mr. Greeley, who ran the general store, nearly dropped his coffee mug. "You stayed in that place? Folks call it the cabin that smiles," he muttered. "Belonged to the Holloway family. Kindest people you'd ever meet. They built that home in the 1880s. Fire took it one winter night. Whole family gone." Eleanor frowned. "But the cabin isn't burned." "I saw it. Slept there." Mr. Greeley shook his head slowly. "That's what they all say. Every few years, someone lost in the woods finds it again. Good people, mostly. Then it vanishes." Eleanor felt a chill. "You mean it helps the lost? Or the lonely?" he said. "Depends on who you ask." Curiosity bloomed like fire in Eleanor's heart. A week later, after settling into her new classroom, she returned to the cabin trail with a lantern, determined to learn more. When she reached the clearing, the cabin stood waiting, just as before. The same glow, the same scent of pine and warmth. She entered quietly and searched every shelf, every drawer, until, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, she found a small wooden box. Inside were three letters, wrapped in twine. The first read, "To whoever finds this home, we built this cabin with laughter and love. If our voices fade, may the walls still hum with joy." Samuel Holloway, 1883. The second was addressed to "Our little girl, Grace," speaking of simple happiness. "Bread by the fire, songs at dusk." The third was unsigned but written in a child's hand, thanking Mama and Papa for the smiling windows. Eleanor pressed the papers to her chest. The cabin wasn't haunted. It was haunted by love. Days turned into weeks, and Whisper Hollow came to adore its new teacher. Miss Gray's classroom rang with laughter. She taught arithmetic and poetry, but more than that, she taught kindness. After lessons, she'd walk to the cabin, her refuge of peace. There, she would write her lesson plans by the fire. The rocking chair still creaked softly, and when she played her harmonica, the flames flickered brighter, as if clapping along. She began to believe the Holloways were listening, and perhaps, in some way, she was continuing their story, turning grief into grace, loneliness into learning. Autumn brought thunderclouds that rolled in without warning. One afternoon, a storm roared through Whisper Hollow like a beast. The schoolhouse roof cracked under the wind. Panicked, Eleanor gathered her students, 20 frightened children, and led them into the forest, seeking shelter. Lightning flashed, trees bent low, mud pulled at their boots. Then, through the chaos, Eleanor saw it. The cabin. Its windows glowed brighter than ever, like a beacon smiling through the storm. "Inside, quick!" she shouted. The moment they entered, warmth surrounded them. The fire in the hearth blazed to life on its own. The rocking chair rocked gently, as if comforting the youngest child. Not a drop of rain came through the roof. A small boy clutched Eleanor's hand and whispered, "Miss Gray, the cabin's smiling at us." And indeed, the light reflected in the windows like curved lips, wide, protective, and kind. By dawn, the storm had passed. The forest was silent, birds returning to their branches. The children stepped outside to find the ground littered with broken branches and puddles. But the cabin stood untouched. Eleanor turned to thank it, but froze. The cabin's edges began to shimmer like mist dissolving in sunlight. "Wait!" she cried, running forward. "Don't go!" But within moments it was gone, leaving behind only a patch of wildflowers where it had stood. In the center lay one thing, a folded note, old but dry. "When kindness finds a home, so do we." Eleanor pressed the paper to her heart and wept, not in sorrow, but in gratitude, because she finally understood. The Holloway's home didn't disappear. It simply appeared where it was needed most. News of the night spread faster than wildfire. By sunrise, everyone in Whisper Hollow had heard about the school teacher and the children who had taken shelter in a vanished cabin. Some dismissed it as hysteria, a storm-born delusion. Others whispered reverently that the cabin that smiled had returned to protect the innocent once more. But Eleanor knew what she had seen and what she had felt: the warmth, the laughter, the invisible embrace of something good. Though she tried to carry on as usual, her lessons changed subtly. She began teaching her pupils not just letters and numbers, but compassion. "The language the world understands, even in silence," she'd say. Soon kindness bloomed in the town like spring flowers. Neighbors shared food. Strangers helped rebuild roofs. It was as though the Holloway spirit, passed through Eleanor, had seeped into every heart in Whisper Hollow. One quiet afternoon, as Eleanor finished her class, a well-dressed man rode into town. His horse gleamed black as coal, and his coat was trimmed with city polish. He introduced himself as Henry Holloway, an architect from St. Louis. "I heard," he said, "there was a cabin here, one that smiled." Eleanor's breath caught. "You know the name?" He nodded, eyes distant. "My grandfather used to tell me stories of his parents, Samuel and Rose Holloway. He said their laughter could light a home, but they died in a cabin fire before I was born." When she told him what had happened, the fire, the glow, the letters, Henry listened in stunned silence. "Then the stories were true," he whispered. "The Holloways never left the woods. They stayed to keep their promise, that their home would always be open to the lost." Eleanor felt a chill of awe. The circle was closing. Henry asked to see where the cabin had stood. Together, they hiked the narrow trail through Maple Creek, now blooming with daisies and clover. When they reached the clearing, Eleanor pointed to the patch of wildflowers. "This is where it vanished," she said softly. Henry knelt and brushed his fingers across the earth. He pulled from his coat pocket a small silver locket. Inside was a sketch, a hand-drawn picture of a cabin under 2 oak trees. "It's the same," he murmured. "My great-grandfather drew this before the fire." Eleanor placed her hand over his. "Then maybe it found you through me," she said. He looked up, eyes glistening. "Maybe it's time to rebuild it. Not just for them, but for everyone who needs a place to smile again." That summer, the people of Whisper Hollow came together like never before. With Henry's architectural skill and Eleanor's teaching spirit, they began rebuilding the Holloway cabin from the ground up. The townsfolk brought what they could: wood, nails, cloth, paint. The blacksmith forged hinges. The children painted small hearts on the shutters. The widowed seamstress donated her late husband's quilt to hang on the wall. Every plank seemed to hum with purpose. Every hammer strike echoed like laughter. One evening, Eleanor wrote a small inscription above the door: "A home built with laughter never truly disappears." That night, when the lanterns flickered inside, Henry swore the windows curved, not just reflecting firelight, but smiling again. Weeks passed. The cabin stood complete, warm, sturdy, and alive with light. One dusk, Eleanor stayed behind while the others walked home. She lit the fire, sat by the window, and hummed the lullabies she had once heard in her dream. As she turned to the window, her breath caught. In the glass reflection stood three figures, a man, a woman, and a laughing child. Their faces glowed like candlelight. Eleanor whispered, "The Holloways." The woman's reflection smiled tenderly and placed a ghostly hand against the glass. The child waved. The man nodded once, a silent thank you. Then, as the last rays of sun vanished, so did they, leaving only the reflection of Eleanor's tearful smile in the pane. By October, the new cabin had become the heart of Whisper Hollow. The villagers organized a harvest festival, the first in many years. There was cider and pie, fiddles and laughter, and children chasing one another under garlands of dried corn husks. The air was alive with joy. The cabin's windows glowed warmly as the sun went down. Some said they saw the reflection of faces dancing in the glass, not just their own, but others, old ones, kind ones, familiar somehow. Henry and Eleanor sat on the porch steps, watching the lanterns sway. "It feels alive," he said. "It always was," she replied softly. "We just reminded it how to smile again." When the fiddler struck his last tune, the whole town sang along. The forest itself seemed to hum in harmony. One morning, a few days after the festival, Eleanor went to open the cabin door. On the table lay a new letter, written in the same flowing hand she'd seen months before. "Miss Gray, we thank you for giving our laughter a home again. The cabin smiles once more, and so do we. When you see its windows glow, know that love remembers." The Holloways. Eleanor's eyes brimmed with tears. "Love remembers," she repeated. She framed the letter and hung it by the hearth. And that night, when Henry returned from town, she told him softly, "They've gone home." He smiled. "Then maybe now, so can we." Years passed like gentle rain. Eleanor and Henry married beneath the oak trees beside the cabin, surrounded by townsfolk and children she once taught. Together they ran the little school and kept the cabin open for travelers. Those who stayed there swore they felt peace unlike any other. One woman, a widow passing through, said she dreamed of her late husband smiling through the window. A wounded soldier found the courage to return home after sleeping by the fire. The cabin had become a place of healing, where hearts mended and hope rekindled. Eleanor often said, "Homes are not built of timber, but of love that refuses to leave." And every night, as the sun dipped behind the pines, the windows gleamed faintly, never bright, never dark, just softly alive. One autumn night, decades later, Eleanor sat alone by the hearth. Her hair had silvered, her hands trembled slightly as she wrote in her journal. Outside, mist rolled in, the same cool, whispering fog that had once brought her to this place. She looked toward the windows. The forest beyond glowed faintly gold in the moonlight. She whispered, "It's been so many years, old friend. I think I understand you now." She closed her eyes and smiled. "I'm not afraid to rest." That night the fire burned bright and steady, brighter than it ever had. The next morning, Henry found her seated peacefully in her rocking chair, the Holloway's letter resting in her lap. The cabin's windows shone with soft light, though there was no fire inside. Henry buried Eleanor beneath the oak tree beside the cabin, the same spot where wild flowers always grew. The townsfolk gathered, singing the lullabies she had once heard through the rain. That evening, as the sun dipped low, something miraculous happened. The windows of the cabin began to glow, warm, golden, radiant. And in their reflection, the villagers saw two figures, Eleanor and Henry, standing together, hand in hand, smiling out at the world. No one dared to speak. A breeze passed through the forest, carrying a whisper. When kindness finds a home, so do we. From that day onward, travelers through the Ozark woods told the same story. On misty nights near Maple Creek, a cabin appears, its windows shining like laughter, guiding lost souls to safety. And if you look close enough, they say, you might see your own reflection smiling back. Not because the cabin is alive, but because love never truly leaves where it once lived.